Welcome to Behind the Data with CloverDX. I'm Matthew Stibbe, your host, and today I'm here with Michael Lintonen, who is Director of Technology and a 12-year veteran at VasoHealthcare. So great to have you on the show, Michael. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Before we dive into your world, let's start with a really practical question. What in the world of data and data technology, data engineering, are you particularly excited about at the moment? What should people be looking at?
I think it's really the growth of open source finally. I think we're seeing this transition away from these de facto solution providers we've had for so long. Like, yeah, if you want a medium size data warehouse, you're looking at Microsoft SQL. If you want massive scale, you might be looking at Oracle. That's kind of start transitioning a little bit when we got to Cosmos DB and kind of starting to diversify. But now we're finally starting to see Postgres, or Postgre, or however you want to pronounce it, really starting to come to the forefront. And I remember dealing with that like 15 years ago, and it was always kind of like this thing you just use for little side caches and other things. It was never actually the core of your data structure. Now it's becoming that. It's fascinating, like all the little open source products now that are really supporting organizations, and that Microsoft is no longer the biggest player for some of this.
That's fascinating. Are there any particular pieces of open source software that you find yourself using on a regular basis?
I have so many pieces of open source software. It is comical. But yeah, we have some Postgres we are messing around with. Oh geez, I don't know. We literally like it is ridiculous how much we have. I can't even list it all. But yeah, we don't use it necessarily to support the business as much as we use it to support our internal operations and to allow us to operate at speed. That is really the key to a lot of the open source solutions, is trying to operate at speed. Even if it's something as simple as, okay, we need to do a lot more with the terminal now than we ever used to have to. Microsoft is very determined not to have GUI interfaces. They want everything to be run through the CLIs, and that's fine. But okay, CLIs, like you need something sometimes a little bit more robust, and things like Oh My Posh or Oh My ZSH that can allow you to tweak and tune your terminals to make them a little more robust, provide more features to them to allow you to operate at speed, are really useful, and they're free. You just go to GitHub, start downloading, start building these things.
Do you think Microsoft is sort of slightly regretting letting go of MS-DOS and the command line interface there, and it's sort of like, well, that Windows stuff was a bit of a mistake. Let's get back to command lines. I don't know. It's been a long time since I typed anything into a command line, to be honest. So let's explore your world a little bit. Tell me first of all what VasoHealthcare does.
Yeah, so we're referred to as the alternate sales channel. So essentially, we are a contract sales team. So 95% of our workforce is salespeople or something in the sales realm, whether that be a regional manager for a sales team or the actual salesperson on the ground. So we are contracted by other companies to sell on their behalf. So our contract right now, we have two of them with GE Healthcare to one contract is to sell what they refer to as the diagnostic imaging portfolio, and that covers everything from your X-rays up to your big iron, CT, MRs, things like that. And we have another contract with them to sell their ultrasound. And the reason why they contract us is simply because we are specialists in the rural markets and the smaller mom and pop shops, the harder sells, where they might be able to walk into Mayo or university and and sell them on something in a 3 to 4 month lifespan of that deal to get that thing going. Some of our deals, we've had deals take up to 8 years to push through. It's incredible how long it can take to get some of the stuff processed. So that's why we're around, and we make up around a quarter of their total revenue per year. So we definitely aren't a small piece of their income.
You encourage me in a way. Selling websites and marketing services has a long sales cycle, but nothing like 8 years. Good grief! And Michael, what's your role within that organization? What do you do?
A little bit of everything. But yeah, we are rather fond once we get outside the sales realm of giving everybody as generic of titles as possible
Mm.
because we have to all be jacks of all trades. So my role really is all things technology, end to end. So whether that be the data infrastructure, our Azure cloud, our on-prem infrastructure, the iPads we deploy out, the app MDMs, data administration, website coding, like whatever is in need of work and that my team doesn't have the bandwidth to do is what I am working on at any given day.
And in your team, how big's the team? What's the composition of that?
We are a very small team, relatively. There's still quite a few companies in our size that are about the same as us. So kind of preface that the size of our company is about 125 employees, and my team is me plus 3 employees currently. We're probably going to add at least one headcount to keep this running, but that's where we're sitting right now. It's just me plus 3.
That's still quite a lot of brain power there. And you mentioned to me before the interview that part of your job is to derive a complete picture of the business to assist with informed decision making, which is great. So, apart from the data that is coming in from or going out to GE, what's the data landscape that you're dealing with? What kinds of data is in your matrix?
We are a little unique where we generate very little of our own data. Only like single-digit percentage of the data we store is actually generated by us. Everything else is either coming in from external lists, whether that be something as simplistic as postal codes to just feed the territory mapping or marketing lists or things like that. But a lot of it is coming from whoever's contracting us. So we are pulling in whatever we can pull in from wherever we can pull it in. Maybe we might be lucky enough to negotiate a connection to an API where we can pull in something with a little more consistency and predictability. But a lot of times when we're dealing with this stuff, we don't have any access to whoever is running whatever they are storing their data on. All we have access to is a data operator of varying skill sets that is doing some sort of manual operations and shipping us a flat file in some random format of, again, interesting variations of quality. So it's
What kinds of data is this? Customer data or prospect data or product information?
Where we are lucky is the data coming in right now is all cleansed. We don't have to worry about any sort of compliancy there, PII or anything else. It makes our lives a lot easier. But this data could be anything. It really is all around the sales lifecycle and the customers. So we are tracking as much as we can track about the customers, what is going on out there, what is changes that are affecting purchasing. Whereas, a good example would be go back 5 years and pet cameras, the nuclear medicine cameras, like nobody's buying those things. Like they buy a new one about every quarter of a century. They just, and that was because there's no real particular need for them. There's not a lot of healthcare or anything that requires the scans provided by that piece of equipment. Well, now we have a new Alzheimer drug. That Alzheimer drug comes with the stipulation of you have to get images done with a PET camera at certain intervals to measure its effectiveness. So suddenly the pet market went from nothing to, oh my God, it's a massive amount of our business. So there's things we're bringing in to try to measure, try to find that stuff, but a lot and around the customers, what is affecting their purchasing. Otherwise, once kind of have that account data, that's kind of the center of everything. We are now just looking at the sales life cycle, looking at from essentially the cradle to grave, opportunity all the way through to revenue. Because in our world, a deal is not final until that piece of equipment is bolted to the floor. So we'll get some commissions when we close a deal, but that commissions could get pulled back if they cancel the deal later on. And that can happen because if you're talking about an MR, you're not going to knock a hospital wall out and create something in a week. That's going to take a year and a half plus. So in that time frame, it could get canceled and that could get clawed back. So we are always very closely monitoring the backlog of installs, things like that.
Right. And how easy is it these days with all this complexity and all these systems and the open source stuff and the data coming in and out to explain what you do to non-techie decision makers, to boards and executives?
Yeah, that is our challenge. It is becoming increasingly difficult to explain this into layman's terms in a way that's both impactful, like where you can actually communicate the true impact of a change that's being made and why you are making it. And also, it is very difficult to translate something in a way that you don't lose the amount of effort that was required to actually execute on it. So there's things we do that at the end of the day, like, it looks simplistic. It's like, it's a web app. How hard was that? It was very hard. Like, you don't want to know. And trying to actually translate that is difficult. And you're also always trying to avoid using jargon, which is increasingly difficult. I mean, if you like have a CFO or something walk into your office and your app is down and they're like yelling at you, you can't just say, oh well, the warp client was having some issues trying to get through the Cloudflare tunnel into the droplet to the guacamole to hop over to a Dockerized container to run the war file or something. You better be writing a resume if you try to do that.
Yeah, they don't want to hear that. So let's dive into a specific data project and explore that a bit. You mentioned that you had to spin up some new processes and data systems to support the GE ultrasound sales. Could you talk a little bit more about that project and perhaps start with the goal of the project?
Yeah, that was a high stress one. That one we literally had maybe 90 days total to ramp up the entire business, like everything, hiring, structures, the entire thing, all the way from leadership down. We had about 90 days. So we had to, first of all, identify what actually is the core components need to even support this business. What can we recycle from existing solutions? And what are their metrics? Their KPIs are obviously different. The different life cycle or different selling cycles, all different things. So there was a lot of just rapid development just to build prototype out things fast. And I know a lot of people like to pan Excel, and Excel's you shouldn't be using Excel. Excel still at the end of the day is one of the best prototyping solutions. A lot of people forget about Power Query and the M scripting language under the hood of that thing. That thing is great for building out the initial prototypes of how are you actually going to connect your data together? Where is the data going to come from? How can you connect together? What can you build for cubes or other things out of that? What kind of tabular models and things can you build? From that, we were able to do that, kind of build some initial prototypes relatively quick before the actual business had to be online. And then because it's in Excel and it is in that M language, we were able to quickly transition that over to Power BI. For the most part, the engines are relatively close. Strangely, there's some deltas in the parity between the engines because Power BI is the golden child of Microsoft. Excel, they just kind of like shove features back down to it when they feel like it. But we are able to move most of that over and then get like initial Power BI dashboards up and running. And those are the kind of the initial proof of concept now. So, okay, we have these dashboards. Do these metrics work? Are these metrics telling us what we need to see? Like, You never, and also like, what are the core metrics? You don't want to have 24 KPIs you're trying to monitor.
Mm.
You're going to fail. You need to have very minimal KPIs that are the core drivers of your actual like success. You need to keep that down like under a half dozen. That are like the big hit items, and we use the Power BIs to help us identify those and identify what those were. And now we are working through, okay, we've built the prototypes, we built these proof of concepts. Now we need to build the final solutions. We need to build the systems that we've had in place for the DI, and that is where these more robust ETL pipelines come in. That's where the final database architectures come in. That's where the final web applications come in. And that's where the big lift operations start occurring. But at the end of the day, it's always like, don't try to get it right to begin with. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Mm.
Just get it functional, get the proof of concepts out there, start playing with it and see what works and learn and grow and continue on, and then worry about trying to build something better. But don't try to build perfect first.
I'm interested in this idea of Excel as a prototype. So this is what I'm imagining is happening. You've got tables and tabs in Excel that are effectively your initial data tables and the relationships between them, so that it's almost like a data structure inside Excel with some data in it, and you're using that to go, if I graph this and I report that and I sum that up,
Yeah,
that's going to give me the basic reporting. Am I imagining that, or am I just like
there's
so
a
stuck in the
whole
90s
different
for it?
side of Excel that most people don't. It kind of had its moment several years ago, and then it's kind of faded from the consciousness of all the data engineers, but still is there. It still is excellent, and it is this whole different side of Excel that is Power Query and Power Pivot. And Power
Ah.
Query is an entire separate component, and it actually now, unfortunately, is only accessible if you have the enterprise licensing for Excel. But it is a full scripting engine where you can write. This isn't the old school, VBAs or anything else. This is like a whole separate programming language, the M language, where you are able to write calls to Salesforce APIs, where you are able to blend and wrangle data through the backend, through this scripting system, and essentially create your Lego blocks. And then with those Lego blocks, you can use the Power Pivot to build the data model. And comically enough, Power Pivot's actually been there for eons, and nobody even really noticed it until last 8 years or so, 8-10 years. But it is essentially, if you kind of have ever modeled out a database and you've stuck your little tables up on the screen and connect your primary keys and foreign keys, that is Power Pivot. That it has that interface behind the scenes to allow you to build these models. And then once you've built the models, you can do things you can't normally do with Excel. You can run pivots on multiple tables instead of a single table. You can build the bane of everybody's existence, DAX measurements. Those things will drive you batty, but they are powerful. But DAX measurements allow you to, instead of just putting a value into a cell and pivot table that's coming from the source, you can write some sort of formula that is merging the two data sets, doing some math on them, and then sticking that into that cell.
And how do you then translate that actually sounding very sophisticated and robust sort of prototype into a larger scale production sort of environment? I mean, what's the tools and transition you need to go through to scale that up?
Unfortunately, a lot of it is not it's not one for one compatible. So M is its own unique creature, but it does have a lot of similarities where you can kind of translate things over if you have knowledge of the two systems. But the main thing is it gives you the main I guess the main transformations. There we go. The main transformations you need and the main queries you need. So once you've built and prototyped this, then you know what your filter criteria have to be on that source. You know what your cleaning routines have to be on that source. You know what your merge routines have to be on that source. You know what is missing that you have to fill in from that source. It allows you to figure that out and figure out the logic to do that. And once you figure out the logic in a scripting engine, even though it's not one-for-one compatible, you're like, okay, maybe they're using if logic over here in case one statements over here, something like that. It can be translated fairly easily. It's not a complete rewrite. And that's what we are doing. We are just take those, if statements, maybe move them into case whens if we are in SQL, or if we're going to the Java side or some of that, the if else statements. So yeah, it's kind of the transition there.
And where does CloverDX fit into this picture?
Yeah, so CloverDX is our we use it instead of SSIS because the problem in our world and the problem with actually a lot of people have to deal with externally provided data is you don't want these black box solutions like SSIS where, okay, it's not a black box when you're building it, but once you compile it into a package and are using it,
that's the Microsoft ETL.
Yeah, so SSIS, right, that is SQL Server Integration Services. That's their ETL solution. And yeah, I really do not like that thing. I'm not a fan of that thing because once you get, it's great when it works. When it dies, it's a black box. You don't know why, and that's where Clover is so critical. Clover is not it's not like a simple as one of the Microsoft engineers back in the day kind of coined the term when it comes to these Excel Power Query systems of, what was it, like clicky, draggy, droppy type of interfaces where you just click, drag, drop, build things. Clover's not quite that, but it's close enough. And when it fails, you can watch the entire flow of the data and you can build it in a very modular fashion. So if a input changes, you can build its solutions in a way that, okay, that input, its ingestion is a separate component. If it fails, it's isolated to that component. I can fix it there. It's not good. I don't have to rewrite code downstream. I can fix it in one place. Similarly, like I can recycle code, and that because that's a lot of the issue. Some of the stuff, like number one rule in coding: don't rewrite the same code. Don't write code twice. Write it once. Reuse it, and that's where Clover is key. It allows us to write libraries. So we can write libraries of cleansing routines for like postal codes, phone numbers, the really annoying white spaces and non-ASCII stuff that nobody knows is there, but oh my God, it will just completely destroy your database. We can write cleansing routines for all of that. And if we find some new little gem in there that the cleansing routine misses, we just change it one time in that one piece of code. And now all of the other components using that cleansing code have that new function. We don't have to repeat work. So it's been absolutely critical. And it's also unbelievably powerful. Like the ability of it to process vast quantities of data rapidly is quite astounding. And even one of the things I have not been able to explain is strangely SQL Server is more fond of it making queries than it is of you directly querying it. And this boggles my mind a little bit, but when we have to, for our web apps, we have to use dynamic SQL. If we are have a web app and we are doing a call against a dynamic SQL stored procedure, the plan that it creates for that direct call will be worse than the plan that's created for Clover if we are going through the Clover API and doing the same thing. So if we put the extra step in of using Clover to talk to it, we will get a faster response than if we just go directly. I don't know how that works.
There's probably some genius coding somewhere in check. Yeah, the clever guys there. So moving on, one of the things that we discussed before was that how very difficult it is increasingly difficult it is to maintain and keep these complex spider webs of applications and systems and data flows, maintain them and keep them secure. And you've been at this now for more than a decade. I'm interested in how the landscape has changed over time and what the challenges are today for that.
Yeah, it's the problem is the landscape is it's becoming quite. It, not sure how else to refer to it other than it's rewilding. It's becoming more feral as time goes on. It's they are just changing for the sake of change at times, and not and it just doesn't accomplish anything other than create more work for us. And it's like, why'd you do that? Because we could, but didn't actually
You're
improve
talking
anything.
about vendors changing things.
It's a lot of stuff like Microsoft is pretty infamous for this. They just decided, yeah, that way you license people in bulk in your environment, we're going to move it over here. And oh, by the way, we're not going to give you any tools to do the migration. You got to do it manually. And oh, by the way, some licenses still don't work. So those people, yeah, you're just stuck. They gave us a 30-day notice on that. And it's like, well, that's nice of you. It doesn't, it didn't improve anything. In no way was a benefit to us. It just created more headaches for us. So we are constantly like trying to keep up with what are the vendors changing on us and trying to adapt to those changes. We are constantly trying to figure out what is the correct tooling for what we are doing. Are we using the right stuff? Are we using the stuff in the best practices, which is also quite challenging to figure out if we are using like stuff as it should be used. Because when you're dealing with some of these companies like Microsoft, they're shedding a headcount, and this started 15 some years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where they decided we don't need quality assurance anymore. The engineers are good enough; they can QA check their own code. Not really. But now it's like, oh, we don't need tech writers either. The engineers can write their own technical documents. Yeah, except like a lot of large companies, Microsoft is kind of siloed. So now you have documents over here that don't agree with documents over here. So it's like, well, which one of you is more right, and which one should we follow? So it is quite. There's a lot of just like detective work to figure out, like even like where are we supposed to go with this? Like how are we supposed to build this out?
And what can
And
you
also
do
trying
as
to figure out like
as a,
what can we even like maintain as a small team.
how do you triage that? How do you keep abreast of it?
It's well ADHD, honestly. I don't think you can work in this field if you don't have that. You just are constantly consuming large quantities of information. You are watching Reddit. You are watching bleeping computers, see what they're posting out there. You're monitoring Twitter feeds. You're trying to look at the message center in Microsoft. Good luck with that at times, but yeah, you're just constantly just listening to things, watching things.
Just drinking from the fire hose constantly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Live on YouTube. Yep. Just watch every video come through.
Well, Michael, we're almost out of time, but as we bring this episode to a close, I'd like to ask you one final question. Reflecting back on everything we've discussed in your experience, if you were going to go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice about data integration, what would it be?
I guess there'd actually a couple of things. One would be build the sandcastle first. Don't worry about the mountain. It can be really overwhelming in this world. Be like, oh my god, like I have this massive, huge Azure thing. Don't worry about it. Worry about where can you affect change first, and build that thing. Get good at that thing. Then worry about something else. Don't worry about the rest of it. And when it comes to like the tools you're using to do this, keep it simple. For me as a manager, especially, like when it comes to my team, they could really be referred to as makers. They really, yeah, they're tech workers, but really they're artists. They are creating some wonderful things. So they are makers, and you have to give those makers tools that they're going to use. So those tools have to be simple. They have to be low friction. If you're trying to bend a tool to your will, they're not going to use it. You have to make sure you're keeping it simple, keeping it low friction, and that will allow your makers to succeed and allow them to grow. And it's kind of like one of the things I always tell people: don't be like fail fast, grow fast. Like don't be afraid to fail. Like the faster you can fail, the faster you can grow. Like try different things, learn, grow. But if you know more than me, then I hire the right people, and I have a lot. Most of my people know some stuff that is like astounds me every day. So,
Well, that's a great place to be, and may everyone have people under management that know more than you, or than one. And with that revelation, I think that brings this episode to a close. And if you're listening and you'd like to know more about CloverDX, or you want to get more practical data insights, please visit cloverdx.com/behind the data. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. And Michael, thank you very much for being a very interesting guest today.
all right, thank you very much.